Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tishna Lodi. I am the panel and workshop director, coordinator for the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival, and I am here with my partner in crime, Violet. And we have three really wonderful panelists who have taken their time to talk with us about editing specifically for horror films and what that means and how do you approach that differently. And so I'm going to turn it over to them to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right in. So Mike, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Mike Pecci. Hi. I am a horror film director. I do some editing as well. And I've been doing this. I've been doing this for, I don't know, like 19 years. So I've made a bunch of different movies. I've got two movies that started as short films, a horror sci-fi called 12 Kilometers and one called Who's There, that are both in development for feature films out here in Hollywood right now. Hopefully that will happen after the pandemic. And I also do a podcast.
Wonderful. Matt?
I'm Matt Smith. I directed a movie that's at the festival called The Altruist. I'm generally a dad most of the time. I finally got back into filmmaking in 2018, just because I had the time because they weren't in diapers, and so this is where I am now. I don't have any film development right now. It's just really going to go back to being dad and homeschooling for the moment until this thing is over.
Wonderful. Neil, what about you?
Yeah, hi. My name's Neil Stevens. I'm actually from Lynn, Massachusetts, so not too far away from where this festival is. But now it's virtual, so I guess it doesn't make a difference. But I live in Los Angeles, and yeah, I'm writer, director of horror stuff. I also edited a lot of my own stuff, but now that it's getting a little more advanced, I bring people in who actually know what they're doing. Yeah, I got some stuff I'm gonna be pitching around. We'll see what happens. Nobody knows what the hell's going on, but I got a feature film kind of based on the short in the festival that I'm gonna be pitching, and I got a TV series as well, like a Black Mirror style anthology series that I'm also gonna be pitching. So we'll see.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to start off sort of the broader genre. All three of you have created something in the horror genre, and I'm going to ask you why. What about horror interests you and really fit for whatever film that you were making at the time that fit that?
So you want me to just jump right in?
Yeah, anybody can jump in. Open discussion.
So why the horror genre, essentially? For me, the truth is, for me, I'm an older brother. So I used to love really scaring the hell out of my siblings. So all my younger brothers and sisters, and I really became addicted to that rush. And so getting into the movie making business, I really wanted to make films that really affected the audience. And surprisingly enough, I think the two genres that affect the audience the most are horror and romantic comedies. And I don't have it within me to do romantic comedies. So I really sort of embraced the horror thing. And what's really fun about horror for me is that it requires a lot of the traditional language of cinema to actually pull it off. So you really sort of learning about pacing, you're learning about suspense and how to build suspense with your blocking and with your staging and your camera work. And then with editing, it's one of the most rewarding edits, I think, to do horror. It's also one of the most complicated edits. I had another horror editor on my podcast last week, and we were talking about how when you do a first edit, when you sit down and start to cut horror, it's the most boring looking thing that you've ever seen in your life. It's like people walking down hallways with crap sound and trying to open doors, and so in the same period of time, you end up at least I ended up becoming a sound designer too, because I have to sound design pretty early on when I'm cutting, because horror is all sound, you know. Yeah, it's fun. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I love it when I see great horror. I get incredibly enraged when I see terrible horror. But it's great because it's one of the last genres, I think, in the industry, well, prior to COVID, in the industry that would still be theater worthy. And if you're doing it on like an indie level and you're doing it low budget, the studios basically are treating horror movies like lottery tickets. So they can really make a lot of cash on something that doesn't cost a lot of money. So.
Yeah. Matt or Neil?
I just, a couple things you said kind of like made me think of something. Like it's funny when you mention that when you're editing horror, like it looks like the worst thing. I've never had a first cut of like a horror short that I was like, you know what, I should pack up my bags and do something else, because this is the worst piece of crap I've ever seen in my life. Like why did I think I actually had any talent with this? It looks so bad, and you're just, and maybe this is for all you filmmakers, editors, like I guess it's something you have to kind of you just have to mentally get over and be like, okay, I know it's absolutely terrible, but I'm gonna shape this hopefully into some kind of gem. But it's honestly my least favorite part of the process is looking at the first cut, because I'm just like, terrible.
Well, yeah, I mean, and when the first. It's also it's like a puzzle then, right? Because I find that's part of it as well. It's like you go through this first cut and you're right. You're like, I just wasted 3 years of my life, and then it's like okay, it can't have been that bad. It can't have been that bad. And it's like you have to dig deep into yourself and be like, oh, right. What is it actually that I'm trying to tell here? And then it's about like going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until you sort of like it's almost like hunting something. You're approaching your quarry. You know it's there. You've been working on it. You know how you're close, and it's just jiggling the things to finally until it finally comes into focus. And you're like, oh right, got it. I mean sorry Neil. That's just jumping in and on that. It strikes me that all of us have the same thing. It's like it feels like we did just crap work, and yet at the same time, you put in the work, and there's something there. It's just like you got to get to it.
But also once you get adjusted to that, like once you understand that that's the game, every time you do it, that's the game. And so when you're on set at that point, you're just stacking. I always say to the cinematographers that I work with that obsess over stuff, so they may be holding up the shot because they're like, there's a reflection on this mirror in the background and I need to like have 50 grips, go over and try to figure it out. I'm like, for the love of God, it's going to be on screen for 3 frames. Can you just move on so that I get enough coverage to cut the scene with suspense? So let's get into the next bit. And I think after a while, you start to understand that that's the game. You're essentially busting your ass on set, and then you show up into the edit room and you look at a bin and you go, there's only like 5 clips in here. That's all we did was like 5 clips. And so once you know that, you're gathering. So set is hunting, like you said. You are in that position where you're like, let me load this bin with as many clips as I possibly can, because I know that this movie is going to be made in the edit, you know?
The other thing is, I don't know if you guys get. I heard you say that just give me enough coverage so that we can have it. I found myself like it's certainly during this film is like I'm just like I want more space at the beginning and the ends of scenes, just to make sure that I can have that space to accentuate. If in that moment I'm finding in the edit that it needs an extra beat. I find that when I have cut off things early or cut off things when, ordinarily, as opposed to letting the camera run for an extra 10 seconds and just to see what happens, I hobble myself in the edit as opposed to allowing things to be expansive, because it gives you that space to be creative in those moments of horror, which are largely silent and largely governed by the audio mix.
You guys are really already starting to talk about what was exciting for me to have the three of you particularly on this panel, which is all of you direct your stuff. So I'm so interested exactly what you guys are talking about of how does that affect your directing style, knowing and thinking about the edit and how important that is for horror and how that really does come together in this genre. How does that affect the way that you come about your process when it comes to being the director for this? Does it, I'll just let you go.
Yeah, I think it informs everything. That's why I always recommend that if you're a director, even if you're a writer, because I think it informs when you're writing as well, is to learn how to edit. I'm not a technical person. I had to edit because no one else was going to edit my stuff unless I paid them a lot of money, I realized, because editing is it's extremely time consuming. So I had to kind of just learn it because I had to, but it turns out that was one of the best things that I could have done as a filmmaker, because it informs everything. I mean, kind of what Matt was talking about, of like just knowing what you need, because the people on the set, they're not going to know how you're editing it in your head. So you know when you can cut corners, you know when you need another take, you know when you need to switch something up, but nobody else is really going to know that. So I think it's extremely important you don't have to be like a professional editor, but just like understand how it works so that you can at least edit it in your head. So on the day, you know what you're going to get, and then the crew is going to feel more confident in you because you seem like you actually know what the movie is.
Mm-hmm. That's the move. The move really is, I don't know why I decided to do this art form. Like when I was younger, I wanted to be a comic book artist, and sometimes I wish I did that, because at that point, all I have to do is just pick up a brush. But in our business, every brush comes with their own, like, my brush may be fighting with his wife this morning, and now I have to deal with him and deal with like all of the stuff that comes with making a movie, because it is such a insanely collaborative business. And I was talking to someone about it last week, and I said, isn't it funny that a lot of filmmakers that get into this business are antisocial, and then they're forced to be incredibly social? Because it is that thing. And with editing is where the movie happens. It is. Like, everything's built for the edit and everything's built for the cut. And there are three different mindsets. There's the development of a movie, in which you can play and you're just like, it's going to be amazing, and there's going to be a giant like T-Rex that jumps through this building and does all this stuff. And then there's production, where you go, I'm an idiot, I can't afford a T-Rex, I don't know how to do any of this stuff, let me try to I bullshit my way into here, let me try to make this happen. And so then you're running around doing that, and then I directly advise that you take a few days off, and then you get into the edit room. And then when you're in the edit room, I think the power of having an editor these days for me is that editor is never connected to all the misery that I went through to get those shots. The editor doesn't care. The editor doesn't care that I had to kill 3 babies in order to get this crane shot. You know what I mean? And I'm like, that crane shot's going in no matter what. And he's just like, no, it just sucks. You're like, okay, cool. That's why you're an editor. And that's the definition of an editor. An editor is someone that goes through and edits out the material that doesn't work. And so I agree with that statement. I think that it's important for a director to know how to cut, because you're cutting when you first start. I'm cutting when I'm making storyboards. I'm going through the process of editing this film in my head, but I also think it's incredibly important that every other position on that crew at one point in time ends up in the edit room, because they all understand. And a great example of this was, I was cutting my film 12km, and I had a scene that was like a one Steadicam, like a long Steadicam, Paul Thomas Anderson kind of shot that goes through this whole sequence. And there was like 30 extras and these guys that were quote unquote supposed to be workers. And there was this one guy on set that just, all he had to do was wrap a cable. And I'm looking at him, and he's just like shaking, and he's doing this thing. And I'm like, what are you doing? And so walking over to him, I'm like, have you ever picked up a cable in your life? Do you not understand how these things work? And he couldn't wrap his head around it. And he finally got it after a while. And then when I was in the edit process, I said, come to the edit room. Come to the edit room so that you can see that you're trying to act and you're trying to make this interesting. But when you see it in the cut, you're just going to get cut out of the film, because it just doesn't work for it. And he thanked me for it. He was like, I can't believe that that's what it looks like. And that's how it all comes together. And I said, yeah, it's important for you to understand your place in the edit. And straight through with everybody, gaffers, grips. I think the people that I love to work with are folks that at one point in time, even if they just show up with a 6-pack of beer and they sit in the background and they watch you cut, they become better people on set.
Yeah, I think when I think about like the editing informing the directing, I mean, essentially you storyboard it out, you write the script, you've got this picture in your mind of what you need. A friend of mine, when I was doing this, when I was making the film, and the film was fairly fraught during the production, as it always is. And I was like, I don't know what the hell we're doing, you know. And he's like, just treat it like a business. You get a minimum viable product. That's it. Once you know that you've got the product, then you start playing. And I realized that, and the next day we did one shot. It was a long shot, and we finally, and I was like, oh, we you know, you've got it, because you slot it into the stuff that you need, that you know that you have to have in order for this story to actually be told. And I was like, okay, great, we got the minimal viable product. We can move on from there. Also, just like having that sort of like that continual sort of unspooling in your mind gives you the opportunity to grab onto stuff, I think, in the moment that you didn't know that was going to be there. So like there's a moment in the Altruist that's in Boston, which is I knew kind of what we were going for, but in the moment, Liz, the actor, started doing something, and as it was going on and going on and going on, I was like, we have to keep going and going and going and going more and more and more, because I realized that it was going into that shot that I had imagined, but it was also expanding it in a way that I needed to grab onto, and I needed more of that in order to make that particular moment work. So and that's what, and you know, and it translated very well when we got into the editing room. And if I had locked myself into something, I guess what I'm saying is that shot would not have worked. It would have been a nightmare. And so having that pre-edit in your brain definitely allows you the ability to play as you're directing going forward through the production.
Right. Now, so you guys have also spoke a little bit towards what I think is the key of horror films, really, is the suspense. And we've talked about sort of how editing affects the directing. So how, when you know you have to build that suspense for your film, what are the tactics and methods that you go about doing that? How much of that is built in the directing part of it when you're actually there, and how much of it comes from editing and like you said, Mike, earlier, the sound that goes with it, and is that there in your head when you're going about it? How do you build suspense for all of our young filmmakers possibly watching this and they want to make a horror film? Building that suspense, what's important for that in the filmmaking phase of that?
Well, I always say to young filmmakers that ask that sort of thing, I think it's a couple of different steps as far as directing is concerned. It's a couple different steps. One, I say to anybody that when you get into this business, it takes 8 years before anybody gives a shit about you. So in that 8 years in the beginning, what you need to be doing is building your toolbox. And it's essentially the tricks, the stuff that you learn when you do those little movies on your iPhone, those things that you learn when you go and you PA and end up lighting your best friend's movie. It's all of these little these insights into the language of cinema, where it's like, hey, look, if I turn the light on and turn the light off and I hide a cut in there, then I can have a monster show up. Or if I'm hanging out with the sound guys and I actually change the position of the lavalier and I change the pitch of the lavalier, then it gives anxiety to the listener. And so you're basically learning about all the stuff that is invisible, in theory, is invisible to the viewer. So there are hundreds and thousands of different tricks to get somebody to feel close to the way you felt that night you woke up and you heard glass break in the kitchen and you had to make your way down a dark hallway, and for some reason the light didn't work in the kitchen and you had to figure out whether or not someone broke into your house. And turns out that you just, put the glass on the counter the wrong way and it fell off. So what you're doing is, I think as a storyteller, for me, I'm trying to convey stuff that I felt in real life. And then I'm trying to figure out, the same way I would if I was drawing something about sketch lines and shading and dimensions and all that sort of stuff, how do I use the tools that exist in this medium, which is sound, edit, blocking. Blocking's huge, by the way. Blocking on set and where you're placing the actors and where the actors fall into frame, and visually, what does that mean? So when you learn all these tricks and techniques and you start to put them together, you start to build your own personal toolbox, and it becomes, it answers the question. The second question, most asked question that I get on my podcast is, how do I develop my own style? And people think that we set out to develop our own style, and it's not the case. Your style is essentially designed by you fixing all your screw ups. So like, as you're making a movie and you're like, I'm going to be the next David Fincher, and you're like trying to do all of David Fincher's stuff, and you don't have the resources, you don't have the patience, you don't have the 340 takes that he did that day. And so then you get in the edit room and you go, well, I'm not David Fincher, And so you're like, how do I fix this? And so then the process of fixing it really makes it into something interesting. And a good example, without going too long, a good example of that is years ago I did a horror music video for this band Meshuggah, who's a heavy metal band. And they had hired us to come in and do the 12 stages of hell. And we had designed like all 12 stages. There was prosthetics and there was all sorts of really cool stuff. And then 4 days before, the label called us up and said, we're cutting your budget, so you're going to have 1/3 your budget. And I'm like, well, it looks like we're going to have 4 stages of hell. And so I'm trying to design this thing, and then our location fell apart. And so the location was gone, this beautiful location. And so now I had to shoot it in a 12 by 12 foot room with black curtains and the whole thing. So I show up to set and I'm banging this thing out and I'm trying to make it look good. And I hate myself and I hate everything I'm shooting. And then I get in the edit room and I look at the bins and I'm like, there's 3 clips in here and there's 2 clips in here. And so I'm trying to cut this damn thing. And we do the first edit and it's like, we're never going to get hired again. This is terrible. And the beauty of horror is that I was able to be creative and fix it and say, hey, look, while you're cutting to the editor, I brought in a pile of sand, put it on the edit room floor, and started bringing in cockroaches and all these different insects and shot them macro and shot all these pieces macro and literally built the edit in the edit room with all these pieces. Now, that video's got, 20 million views, and everybody loves that video, and they don't realize that what it was a giant Band-Aid. It was like me screwing everything up and trying to fix it. And then that becomes your 14 years later, Rolling Stone's writing about it going, well, look at the style. And I'm like, it was me screwing it up, man. You guys have no idea. So yeah.
I can, just piggybacking a lot on what Mike just said, but one just quick thing for suspense is try to give us some kind of character moment at the beginning so we at least can empathize with this person who is about to have something horrible or something not horrible happen to them. Then suspense is all about elongation of time, and for that elongation of time you want to put as many little breadcrumbs as you can that sort of create some sort of stimulus in our brains. So just putting little things where you go, what's that? Ooh, what's this? What's this? Try to be as specific as you can with those breadcrumbs to the environment. You can have a window, but that's kind of generic, but anything you can do that specifically is something that this character would have in their house is going to help your world building. And then finally, people are so attuned to scares now that you have to try to do it in a way that maybe hasn't been done, or do it differently from the way it's been popularly done. This is the hard part. But trying to find one, or use our knowledge against us of where we expect it, and then have it come from some other way. Just adding one more that's going to be oh, I didn't know it was going to come from there. those are like little quick things that can help people with building suspense.
Yeah, I think the way that I went about conceiving of this particular movie was I kept thinking of it as sort of like orthogonal changes. So it was establishing a pattern of normalcy and then shaking it. And then that becomes the new pattern of normalcy. And it's like, okay, here we are. And it's like, nope, you're not there. And then you go right angle again. And like Neil says, okay, we're here now. We're here where this guy is doing something weird, but we're okay. And then you turn again, and then that's the new normal. And then every time you're doing it, you're establishing essentially a really shaky foundation. So by the time you get to like the hardcore sort of stuff that's really going to shake people deeply down, they have no basis for which to grab themselves and to stabilize themselves. And then they're in free fall, and that's exactly kind of why this genre is interesting, because you can get there. You can get to the point where I'm sorry, I don't know what you're doing, and it's making me uncomfortable. And so that's I think if you're the essence of this kind of genre is what is normal and how do we fuck it up, and in the tools, as Mike is talking about, is like they're all like, whether you jump in close or whether you stay far for a long time, far longer than you should, and then something creeps in from the edge, just enough to be seen, and you're like, oh shit, like that type of stuff is this sort of the contamination of the normal, which is how I look at this kind of movie making.
And real quick, just to jump in there and say, I think that if you're a young filmmaker and you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I need to like take some notes and try to figure out how to make horror, I think that you can get caught up and you can get dissuade from starting because you're overly concerned with trying to make something that's new and hasn't been seen before. I honestly think that if you just are honest about what the story requires, do that, because there have been a ton of really scary movies that come out every year that use the same tricks for everything. Same bullshit. I mean, how many times do you watch a movie and it's just loaded with jump scares? And as a filmmaker, I watch it and I go, that is so... And I look at my girlfriend, she's like, ah! And I'm like, oh, fuck, that's actually working. God. So like, don't have that stop you. Be honest about what your movie needs to be scary, and then just do it really well. Like, just like make a good cheeseburger. If it needs to be a cheeseburger, then put some sloppy cheese on it and some caramelized onions and make it a really good cheeseburger, and the audience will eat the hell out of it.
I mean, and to that point, we've got like 110 years of filmmaking. It's like most things that people have been, that are doing have been done, and one way or the other. You go back and look at the movies in the 1910s that. They do almost they were constrained by technology, but they have the exact same toolkit of like, how do we make this interesting? And so it's like, it's not that, it's going to be you. It's going to be what you as a person, as a person and as an individual. One thing we've got in 7 billion people is that's just you. So go to that center.
Right. Yeah. And sort of to that point, as a film festival, we see so many different films, so many different stories, and that come in, and it's never, everybody wants originality and something that's unique and all that stuff. But I think what people sometimes forget is that uniqueness is never the story you're telling. It's never the actual breakdown of the plot. It's the way you execute. It's your own personal perspective. To Matt's point, you're 7 billion people. Everyone's going to have a unique perspective. And if you stay true to it, those usually shine through. And as a film festival, we see that a lot, luckily. And sometimes we don't see it. We started also talking a bit, I'm going to go back to sort of a more general question. We've talked about suspense in horror, and that's a big key part of horror. But what are some of the other things that in the 110 years of filmmaking, in all of your filmmaking experience, do you think is almost essential for horror to work beyond suspense? Since we've talked about that, what is essential for horror to work? And what is some stuff that is maybe associated with horror films that doesn't necessarily need to be in there, that has sort of defined the genre. You mentioned jump scares, Mike. Maybe you want to say more to that. But what do you think really makes horror films horror films?
I mean, honestly, the movie that I'm in development with right now, this is a conversation I was just having with a pretty big production company. And what ends up happening is that you are confronted with budget issues, always. No matter, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're always never have enough money. It's like the clients know how much money it actually costs, and they give you like 20% less of that. You're just like, ugh. And so what it comes down to at the end of the day is it's people. It's how the characters connect to this thing. It's how the characters are affected by what this horror is, and then whether or not the viewers can find somebody in that cast that they identify with. And so I think a big mistake, at least when I started, a big mistake was like, I'm going to make this so brutal. I'm going to make this scary all the time. Next thing you know, you're Michael Bay. You know what I mean? Like every minute of that movie is like Shia LaBeouf screaming and like there are explosions filling every frame, and you're just exhausted. Like you're 15 minutes into the movie and you're like, I don't even know what's going on. My brain is mashed potatoes. And so I think that the trick to good horror is understanding that it's a rhythm, it's a wave. And so I think it's no surprise that Danny McBride's team did the new Halloween. Like they are so good at doing comedy and doing suspense with comedy that transition into horror was so simple for them, because if you can, let's say you're going to take a terrifying sequence, right? And you scare the hell out of somebody, like it's Hereditary and the kid's head gets cut off, spoilers, everybody. And so then after that, if you throw jokes in there, if you throw humor in there, if you throw some levity in there, if you throw a moment of reprieve for the audience, then your next scare will be 3 times as terrifying. And so horror, they call it elevated horror these days, which kind of annoys me, because I think that there's a lot of people that know that the only movies that get financed are horror movies right now, and so they like are pretending it's a horror movie, and it turns out it's like a Lifetime family drama, and you're like, what the hell am I watching? But horror allows you to basically take advantage of all these other genres. So you can mix genres. It could be like a heist horror. It could be a sci-fi horror. It could be a comedy horror. Because you're just trying to get the audience to fall in love with these characters. You're trying to get the audience to fall in love with that story and then just make it scary,
For me, I without getting too esoteric here, because I think your first question was like, what is it like? How do you make great horror? What is it? I mean, there's so many horror movies, but there's so few that like seem to touch some like pressure point in society. There's ones that seem to just rise above all the others, and I suspect it has something to do with there's a great little like book by Lovecraft called Supernatural Horror in Literature, where he talks about what is the difference, why do these stories rise above and why are these other ones like imitations. And Lovecraft says that the ones that seem to rise above are ones that he calls cosmic horror, which have something to do with the great vast expanse of the universe and how minuscule people are and how much like we don't know about the world and we don't know about ourselves. And it's the ones that make us feel like we're in a chaotic world that we don't have control over. And to me, the great horror is like, I mean, ultimately those are the deep fears that we have. I mean, we have fears of like spiders and people with guns or whatever, but really the deeper ones are like, I'm just a human being that's going to live for a little while. I'm going to be dead. I don't know what's going on in the world. I don't have control of the world. Suddenly you start getting into these deeper things, and it's like looking at a movie like Halloween versus Friday the 13th. I'm a big Friday the 13th fan, but like Halloween is dealing with the idea of the boogeyman, of this invisible person that is going to grab you and kill you. Friday the 13th is essentially is an imitation of Halloween. So Halloween is dealing with a source like fear, Whereas Friday the 13th is like an imitation of a successful movie, which I love. I'm no hate on Friday the 13th. I loved it as a kid. So I think as a writer, filmmaker, try to go to the source of like what is the deep, deep fear and start with that rather than look at like a successful horror movie and say, I'm going to do something like that movie. Because then your movie's going to feel like an imitation of that and it's not going to rise to that cosmic horror that Lovecraft was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, the one way that I think about this type of creative process is that all of this that we have, all of that we talk about here is essentially it's a construct. It's an artificial construct. We walk around in our little bubble that we've created because society and genetics and whatnot. We have a brain, and we create this illusion of safety. We create this. We walk around. I'm going to make it to the door without my heart stopping. I'm going to open the door. I'm going to go across the street. I'm going to shake that neighbor's hand. Well, not now, but I mean. I'm going to do that without him killing me. I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive away, and this enormously complicated piece of machinery is not going to explode, and my guts aren't going to go all over the place. It's a collective way of looking at the world that as much of sort of a fantastical construction as any story. I mean, we day by day we delude ourselves that we're going to make it to the next day. And I think part of what the horror genre is shattering at moments that sort of crystalline, very delicate bubble that we have because they're just thoughts, and that we think are more secure than they are, but they're just thoughts. And part of this genre is punching holes in that, and that what Neil's talking about, that universal horror of nothingness. That will bleed through and infect that bubble and leave you with that pervasive, gasping fear of, I was wrong. It's not safe. Nothing is safe. If you can get there, or if you can approach that, you've got an audience that's going to leave going, oh, I don't want to be there.
Totally. You know what else is interesting is that the more I sort of get into the process of getting these things made, the more I realize that if a movie's truly scary, it scares people. And to get a really scary movie made is very hard. And so most of the great scary movies that I see are usually indies or independents, because they don't have to go through the whole approval process of getting it made. Because I feel like I love cosmic horror too, man. I'm a huge cosmic horror nerd, and I think SpectreVision has been doing it the best lately with Color from Space and all that sort of stuff. But you go into, like, if you're trying to pitch that to Hollywood, you walk into a room and they're just like, what? And if it scares them too much, they won't make it. They'll just turn to the next guy that walks in the room and goes, hey, you turn the light on, and you turn it off, and then there's a ghost there. And they go, cool, that's scary. We'll make that. It's funny. It's really weird. And I love getting into, you know, my movie 12 Cam is about cosmic horror, and it's about all that stuff. And I made it in a Russian language. I shot it in a language I don't speak because that was scary. But, you know, walking that into pitch rooms for the future, they're just like, so this is really scary and it's kind of evil. It's like, yeah, that's the point, right? Like, it's what you're hiring me for, is to come in and scare the shit out of you. And they're like, just you have a movie about turning the lights on and turning the lights off and then there's a ghost in there? And you're like, oh, right. Or how about like a scary doll, you know? Like, there's a doll in a room and it's haunted. And everybody knows what that is. They're like, no, it's a cosmic being. How about if it's a werewolf, right? Because everybody knows what werewolves are. And you're just like, how about you get a gun and I'll make a horror movie right here in the room with the rest of you guys. So it's fun, man. Like, I completely agree. I think that if you're making this on your own and you're trying to come up with something that's really scary and you want to scare the hell out of people, definitely take that into consideration. But also take a note out of Spielberg's book. Spielberg made one of the scariest movies, Jaws, and he really sort of played upon that fear that we all have. Like, I'm sort of waiting at the top of this stuff, and there are things down there touching my feet, and I don't know what the hell they are. And he killed it. made blockbuster movies based upon that stuff. So take that stuff into consideration when you're deciding what it is that you want to make. Ultimately, think about the audience as well as yourself, and just go like, how do I really scare people? And then if you package it right and you say, hey, guess what? This is a movie about a scary doll. And then halfway through, as a sneaky filmmaker, it turns out to be a cosmic thing, and the studio didn't realize it. Then you've snuck it in there, and you've won. You've beat everybody. You know what I mean?
We started again. You guys like make my job super easy, because every time I have a new question I want to ask, you guys like set it up for me on a silver platter. It's great. Which is, what are the horror films that have influenced you and your films and your filmmaking, and also just possibly what sparked your love for films in the first place?
Oh God, there's so many. I don't even know where to start. I would say the one that really messed me up as a kid. I was a kid and I was sick for like 3 days after watching it. Was The Haunting, the 1961 Robert Wise movie, and that was actually very informative for me as I got older, in trying to think of what terrified me the most about it. And I think a lot of it is the fact that you don't actually see anything in that movie. It's all in your imagination. And when you especially as a kid, you have a very fertile imagination. So, they leave, a lot of people would be pissed off about that, because they go, I want to see the monster. There's a whole thing that Stephen King in his book, Dance Macabre, where he talks about, like, whether or not to show the monster at the end of the door. Because if you don't show the monster, you leave it in someone's imagination, and that can be great. Then a lot of people are like, I want to see the monster. Stephen King's like, I'm going to show you the monster, because I'm going to take that 1 out of 100 chance that I actually deliver a good monster. But that, I guess without going on too much of a tangent here, that was the movie that really, really messed me up. But others like Rosemary's Baby, I think The Shining, obviously, The Babadook, Get Out. And another quick thing about cosmic horror, a lot of people think cosmic, they think Lovecraft and monsters from outer space. Cosmic horror can be the cosmic horror within you. Like, to me, The Babadook is cosmic horror. That it's about these things that are inside of you that you don't really. It's like you would think, why would I ever want to kill my kid? Like how could a person think that? Yet they made this movie, and so many people are like, oh my god. There are cosmic things within us that we don't really understand, that terrify us, and that's like a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's literature is about that as well. But yeah, anyway, that would be the movie I would pick.
I would say, I think one of the biggest influences on my career is probably The Thing. So it's probably John Carpenter's The Thing. I think that, overlooking, I love the effects in that movie, but I don't think the effects are the reason why that movie's so fantastic to me. I think that it's more about the ensemble. It's more about the team and the crew. And I'm kind of torn, because the movie doesn't scare me anymore, but I kind of want to go live in that movie. Like, I kind of want to go be there. I love the way that he basically made a really amazing stage play for that movie. And then I love the way it ends. It's no surprise that movie failed, coming out the same year that E.T. came out. And it was like, hey, there's an alien chasing Reese's Pieces around, and then there's an alien sitting with Kurt Russell at the end of the movie going, we're going to die. Yeah, let's just see if we do. And then they cut, and so that's really great. And then I think the big one, I think the franchise that really scared the crap out of me, and really grossed me out and really freaked me out. It made it so that if we start to travel to Mars, I'll never go, is Alien. I think the entire Alien franchise is just amazing. And I think that, Ridley's version of like Alien, the first one, and how slow paced it is, and how how beautiful it is and terrifying it is. That movie is a huge influence on everything that I do too. So,
for me, you guys obviously of a generation. I mean, there's a lot of the same influences. Whether we're talking about Roman Polanski in a lot of his stuff. I mean, whether it's Repulsion or Rosemary's Baby, he uses a lot of the same techniques and influences. But there's also pretty much all of Kubrick. Again, you can say, sure, he's got The Shining, but if you look at 2001, that's basically a horror film as well. I mean, and that's like, to me, that you have Alien and you have 2001 in terms of like sci-fi horror. There's just that's kind of where the sweet spot is for me. But then I go from there and I go into something like Tarkovsky with Stalker, and that's another thing that I go back to again and again and again, especially for pacing and especially for getting that sense of like what is going on, and feeling that I'm puzzling my way through something that could kill me at any moment, even though I don't know what it is. There's that sense of dread that he was able to really imbue that film with. But yeah, those are like the major ones. The guys that really deal with pacing, I find, are that I'm drawn to very much. That same. I mean, like, yeah, 2S was a great movie. And I love what's the no, Get Out, but Us is the next one. That seemed to take a lot of what he was synthesizing, a lot there, from all of those genres, and I really appreciated like how that was tied together, and a lot of the stuff that informs me as a creative artist, he was able to like knot together in something that was extremely satisfying.
And what's fascinating about that is that he's a comedian. So Get Out and all those movies, that he's a comedian that did comedy sketches. And if you look at his comedy sketches, if you go back and watch the old Key and Peele show, the pacing for a lot of their bits is horror pacing.
Oh yeah, it's straight on, like without a doubt. I mean, and they do bits that are just jump scares and slow, and it's a lot of their stuff is he obviously has been working on that for years.
Yeah, it's cool, man. It's very cool.
Okay, well, we're sort of at the end of our panel. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk about this with us, and horror and editing for horror, and giving some tips and tricks for the future filmmakers. Many of the people who attend our panels are filmmakers who are trying to get those tips and tricks. So this is invaluable to them. So thank you so much for your time, and really appreciate you guys being here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if I could, I'm going to shamelessly plug my podcast. So if
now is the time to shamelessly plug.
If you're watching this and you like this format and you really want to know more, you should come follow my podcast. It's called Love with the Process. You can find it on Apple and all that shit. But essentially, I try to get on a lot of horror filmmakers, a lot of people that we like, the crew that has worked with people that we've talked about on the show, like to dissect and really understand the language of cinema. And if you're looking for that toolkit, if you're looking to build that toolkit, we sort of guide you through it. So come check us out.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much